College Football Nerds here talking Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M news. We heard about it like the rest of y'all, and this is not super surprising, though it's somewhat surprising given that massive buyout. We got a note about that in a little bit. I want to remind y'all, if you haven't yet, please like, please subscribe. Helps us out a whole lot, and it also helps you out because you get to hear awesome content. We know this isn't the first time you've seen us, so go ahead and just do it. Just do it. Like and subscribe. I got Josh, and we're going to talk about this. Josh, we've not been high on Jimbo Fisher for a while, somewhat because of his stubbornness about the offense, which, to his credit, this year supposedly turned the reins over to Petrino to come in and sort of step back and just be the coach. Just be the coach. And, you know, Lane Kiffin had his shots about doing less with more with Jimbo, which Kiffin's going to just poke the bear as much as he can. But in my opinion, and I said it on Twitter today, the biggest thing for me with Jimbo and like the biggest contributor to his downfall was that he waited too long to let go of that offense, which meant he wasted some really good defensive years, some really good coordinator situation. And when you have a great coordinator like Elko, or you have a great one side of the ball, you can't be mediocre on the other side of the ball because you need to create momentum as a team with a scheme, not trying to rhyme. And he just never did that. It was peaks and valleys. It was luck if he had a big win. And he didn't get to take advantage of when he was good in certain areas. And I think had he given up the reins on the offense maybe 3 years ago, he wouldn't be in this position. What do you think, and anything to add about how we got here with Jimbo?
The refrain from everyone the past few years with Texas A&M is that they've been this perennial 9-3 or 8-4 team where they beat everybody worse than them and they lost to everybody better than them, so to speak, right? Playing in the SEC West is brutal. It just is. People can talk about all the different divisions and who's up and down in a given year, but even in its worst years, it's still deeper than even the Big Ten East. And there may not be as many necessarily top teams, but if you're Penn State, yeah, you may lose to Michigan and Ohio State in a given year, but if you're Texas A&M and you're a similar quality team, which I think they've often have been, there are 4 or 5 teams better on their schedule at times, where Penn State probably only plays 2 that are more talented. And in terms of top 15 overall rosters, in terms of recruiting talent, they play way, way more than just about anybody else. And I think that's given them a pass. But the problem becomes, one, when you don't ever beat any of those teams, and they got a win a couple years ago over Alabama, which kind of extended things a little bit. I think that was an Alabama team that was pretty well fundamentally flawed. And I think we're starting to maybe have some validation of the fact that Bill O'Brien isn't a great offensive coordinator, given the roster's still pretty bad performance up there in New England right now. And I think what's really tacked on to that is how many times they've lost games that they probably should win, right? Last year was an absolute disaster. The Appalachian State game where Texas A&M offensively against Appalachian State, if you've forgotten, they had 186 total yards. They failed to hit 100 yards rushing or passing in that game. They went on to lose to, last year, Mississippi State team that wasn't particularly good. They lost to Alabama without the starting quarterback in a game where Alabama couldn't throw a forward pass. Lost to South Carolina. Lost to Ole Miss. Lost in a blowout to Florida. Lost to a bad Auburn team. Even when they played UMass, second to last game of the year, they won 20-3, didn't put up 400 yards of offense. It's just been all around bad. And they went from winning the games they ought to win to sometimes winning those and never beating anybody better. And that's not where you need to be. And to your point, there were teams that were able to challenge maybe the upper echelons of the SEC or the upper echelons of the conference that had a chance to make more of a statement. And those teams really didn't capitalize. But even there, Daniel, I mean, like, I'll push you here. That 2020 season, people bring up a lot, right? You know, what are their best? They can't hit less than 3 losses outside that one COVID year. I think the other thing people forget in that COVID year is they played 2 ranked teams in the regular season. They played Alabama, and they lost 52-24. The next week they played a ranked Florida team. They won by 3. And that Florida team ended up playing for the East Division title, but wasn't necessarily a phenomenal team. and they, kind of handled things pretty well. Had a lot of wins by about 9 to 10 points the rest of the year. Beat good North Carolina team with a bad defense by 14 to end the season. They've never been much more than pretty good, and they've done that despite having top 5 recruiting classes. So it's not shocking to me that Jimbo Fisher's let go. It's not shocking to me that they've gotten the criticism they've gotten, because we've constantly kind of defended them for being a better team than they're given credit for. But as you said, they've absolutely never done anything to put that forward and really do anything with it, or to take any sort of next step at any point through Jimbo Fisher's tenure at Texas A&M.
Pointing out the fact that 8-4, 9-3 is really not going to get it done, given, Texas fans like to say that A&M shouldn't have these expectations because they've never had a level of success that would merit the expectations. But I would argue when you have a fan base like A&M, when you're showing recruits a packed out 100K stadium, and you've got elite facilities, elite monetary support, now elite NIL support that a lot of other programs don't have, they gave Jimbo every opportunity to succeed. I don't think, first of all, he never won the West, so I don't think it's unfair to let him go. I also don't think it's unfair for them to have higher expectations than what they've had, given all of those other factors. The only thing missing from A&M to merit the expectations is previous championships. But there were a lot of teams that put a lot less into their coach and support their coach a lot less and have more success. So, and we don't know what their expectations are. We don't know that they're saying, if you don't win a national championship, you're going to get fired this year. They probably just wanted him to compete for the West, and that didn't happen. Having said all that, that probably does limit the candidates that they might bring in. I think one of the reasons they fired him now is because they wanted to get ahead of a season and a cycle of firing and hiring coaches, and they want to get their guy before there's a bidding war, which clearly I don't know that they care that much, but they want to get the best candidate they can this year, the best candidate available. And the problem is, I don't know if there's a lot of elite candidates available. There's a lot of heat around Lane Kiffin, and I think he'd probably take the money and take the job. I think he's probably a little frustrated at the NIL situation and what Ole Miss can do financially. He's never going to win a national championship at Ole Miss. But guys like Ole Miss, there's people saying Deion Sanders. I don't know that these guys are ever going to have a clean season. I like Lane Kiffin, but I'm not sure he's the kind of guy that's going to have a team disciplined enough and bought in enough that they don't fall off a little bit after that first loss, or that they can run the table. To me, Lane Kiffin has peaked, and he's going to be a 9-3, 10-2 type coach, whether he's at Sam Houston or he's at Alabama.
I tend to agree with that. Kiffin's style is very aggressive in a lot of different ways, both in terms of his offensive philosophy, how often he goes for it on fourth downs, 2-point conversions. The reality is of those approaches, and we talk about this a lot, right, is it increases your ability to outperform expectations or to have a good game, but it also sort of backfires a little bit in that it increases your volatility or your variability, right? Kiffin doesn't do things in a way that I think are particularly sustainable to go undefeated in a given year, to go 11-1. I don't think he builds the kind of sustained culture, and I'm trying to think of the right word, right? When you think about coaches that do that, it's about trying to build a mindset in your players to not just get yourself up for a game, but to avoid complacency in the rest of the season. That's what the people talk about Nick Saban being a master of, but it's also something a lot of other coaches. We've talked a lot on this show about Ryan Day and his ability at Ohio State, whether people acknowledge it or not, that they've lost some big games, but they've stopped losing the easy ones because he's taken away that complacency mindset. I think Harbaugh, love him or hate him, has done that to a certain extent at Michigan. Kiffin's never going to give you that. So the guy you want to have, if you really have those kinds of aspirations, you need somebody that's not going to lose you this stupid game. Because I think the problem for really Texas A&M, LSU's been in the similar boat the last several years. It's when they get in the back half of the season, particularly the back quarter, They're constantly losing to an Arkansas or an Ole Miss or a mediocre Florida team. And that has caused them to sort of derail any chance they had at really competing for a division or a conference, right? They're often ending October right there with a few other teams, LSU and Alabama and Texas A&M are the three teams competing for the West. And then they do something really stupid or lose to somebody stupid and they're just out of it. And then by November, we've forgotten that they were ever in that position in the first place. So I think people that do that are big. But, Daniel, this is where I want to transition a little bit, if you don't mind, to talking about coaches that are a good option. A big thing in my mind in these situations has always been that you need to hire coaches that have significant experience at a high level in directing a major program and understanding how it works from a personality standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, from an operational standpoint, to run a major program. We were critical, very critical, years ago when Willie Taggart got hired. Anybody that watched the show would know he did that. A buddy of mine actually talked to a good friend of mine up here that was played under Taggart, honestly. And he was talking about the way that program ran. And there were a lot of things operationally where it was really clear that staff when they were transitioning from South Florida up were going to have a really hard time understanding what they needed to do to be successful at Florida State. And my friend did not play for him. He actually played for him before he went to FSU. But he kind of noted he wasn't shocked to see how things went at FSU because there's certain things you can kind of get away with at a smaller program or something where you're not having to recruit big-time athletes that you can't otherwise. There's a sense of entitlement that can grow within a program. You've got a lot of guys that are a lot hungrier in a small program. They're a lot more likely to self-police, try to stay eligible in a lot of instances. And when you get to a bigger school where you've had to recruit kids that everybody wanted, it's sometimes harder to get as much out of them. And from a game planning, operational perspective, people miss that jumps up at a tier 2, right? Like having a game plan for a couple games a year against good teams is a very different deal than playing 10 top 40 teams in a given year, right? And you see those, a lot of times coaches lose games they shouldn't lose at the G5 level, and they move up and then, they don't pan out. So in that realm, it was interesting to me when you look at the coaches that are on the list, right? You've got Lance Leopold from Kansas, who came from Wisconsin Whitewater, was very successful, is being very successful at Kansas. But I know Kansas is a team that's playing above their heads, but it's a little different than trying to run a major program with a lot more money and a much bigger recruiting scheme. You got Kleiman at Kansas State, similar deal, won 4 FCS titles at North Dakota State. I think he's a phenomenal coach. There's maybe a little more longevity there because of the size and scale of North Dakota State. They were a recruiting machine relative to FCS, but it's still sort of a similar deal. Jonathan Smith, maybe a little more grounded. But the two names that stick out to me are Dan Lanning and Mike Elko, because those guys have been in major programs. They've seen how they work operationally. They've worked under really big-time head coaches. And look, I am not necessarily someone that believes that if you pluck the fruit from the Nick Saban or Kirby Smart tree or what have you, that you get an instant winner. But I do think there's a major advantage to having a coach that at some point in their career coached a couple years under them, right? Sarkisian is a different coach now than he was before he coached for Nick Saban. I don't think there's any doubt from that. And it has a lot to do with being able to mature. Lane Kiffin, the same way, very different coach. His Tennessee, USC days, he had no idea how to sustain a program. Goes to Saban, and I think the biggest thing from his time with Saban is really seeing, okay, this is how I got to run the machine. And even if I don't like running it myself, I know I got to hire people to do this because I know what it needs to look like. And Texas A&M, to me, the interesting thing is there's a lot of candidates on this list, but to your point, Daniel, I don't think people understand the amount of money in momentum that is being trying to push into this program. And there are a lot of names out there that may end up being big-time candidates, but a lot of those same names, in my opinion, there's a little bit of a danger of I'm not really sure if they know how to drive a machine, that size, right? You try to take the best dirt racer and throw them in a Formula One car. They may not necessarily know how to drive it or handle it when it comes around a corner, and that's a little bit, I think, the problem that Texas A&M is going to have.
So on Lanning, I think he's got a good deal at Oregon. I think the SEC West is just the hardest path to a championship unless you're Alabama. or maybe LSU. I think Lanning stays at Oregon unless an Alabama or a Georgia or an Ohio State job comes up. A&M has all the money and facilities and everything, but they're still a tier below in terms of how good the job is just because of the brand. And here's what's interesting about this is the first kind of era of coaches and cycle of coaches that we've seen hired in the NIL transfer era at a high level. It's interesting to me because one thing, like my buddy was talking about Elko earlier today, and I was like, man, Elko's going to have no heat around him for recruiting, and you've got to be able to recruit in the SEC West. But now I'm thinking like Elko or Kleiman would be my one or two. Maybe Jeff Traylor, but probably not for a lot of the reasons that you listed. He was in high school for, I think, 14 years. UTSA was his first job, and it was just 2 or 3 years ago. Kleiman's a guy that's built a program that won multiple titles. So he knows about winning championships. I don't think he's particularly sexy in terms of recruiting. Same thing with Elko. But when you've got Texas A&M money, Texas A&M facilities, and you can that money also works in the transfer portal, I think that neutralizes a lot of what historically was a big component of what you had to evaluate a coach for if you were looking at an elite school and not just a rebuild at a mid-tier program. One of the most important things that you have to evaluate is whether or not they can recruit 5-star athletes. I think now, if you'd asked me this question 3 years ago versus now, I'd had a totally different answer. To me, I like Elko, I like Kleiman a lot more than I like Lane Kiffin or the moonshot Urban Meyer. Like, I think that Urban Meyer is toast, and whoever overpays for him next is going to get a guy who is very comfortable, was a very elite coach for a time, is no longer that because he's fat and happy, right? Figuratively. But guys like Kleiman and Elko, you take all of the program building and the structure and the hard-nosed mentality that they bring and the winning mentality they bring and pair with them something that helps the one weak spot they have that's recruiting. I like that a lot because I do think we've seen Kiffin's ceiling, and I know that would be the splash name, but I'm not sure long-term he solves the problem. And you may trade 8-4 for 9-3, but you're not trading 8-4 for 12-0.
I tend to agree with that, and I also agree with you. There's a little bit of a trade-off, right? And people talk about recruiting and its importance. Look, I think you can get coordinators and assistants that can go a long way from that in that regard. Sam Pittman was the classic example, right? Pittman is not your prototypical sexy recruiter, but he knew how to run a recruiting apparatus. He had really good connections with coaches. And he made a splash when he first went to Arkansas as a recruiter. Like, he was pretty successful in that regard, and he was very successful in the transfer portal. And I think what that really went to show is that aspect of the job, I think, is a little bit overrated in terms of a head coach's reputation. If you have somebody that was around a high-level recruiting apparatus, they kind of know what it takes to recreate it. And a lot of times I think it's more about having the connections to hire the right people. And Kleiman has been around enough and been in enough places that's successful that I think he can put that together. And Elko's certainly been in a number of places that have been successful. So Elko, to me, is a lot like Pittman, and a guy that I think is probably going to be more successful than you give him credit for because of who he's going to surround himself with. And to me, the ability to set up that apparatus and run the program operationally is the most important part when you're talking about a program like Texas A&M, who has the resources to absolutely recruit at a top level because they're going to get talent and do have talent and have had talent at a top level. And it's just not translated the way it should because at this point, I don't think you can ignore it. Operationally, something's just kind of rotted away under Jimbo Fisher. That was the rumor at Florida State and the accusations when he left and sort of the situation he left there. And it feels like that's what's happened the last couple of years. Last year was a disaster at Texas A&M culturally and operationally. This year, they're better, but they're not great. And I think you need somebody to right that ship, and I think everything else is going to fall into place around it, assuming somebody knows how to build the apparatus to make that work.
Yeah, I think Jimbo Fisher got a little stale at Florida State, and things sort of washed away, and they had a terrible season his last year. I think he had a little bit of rejuvenation coming into A&M, but that level of money does change you, and you do lose a certain amount of drive, especially if you already had a national championship. Josh, you always say you don't feel sorry for these guys because they're multi-mega millionaires. They're taken care of, and I don't want to be, sympathetic to the downtrodden millionaire, but in a lot of cases, I do feel bad for coaches who go to a place where it was just a hard situation to win. And, because once you do make the money, the only thing you have left is your legacy, is what you are able to achieve within your career. And for a lot of guys, it feels a little unfair in terms of just when they look back on their career, what they're going to see because they weren't able to accomplish some of their goals. For that, I do feel bad. For Jimbo, though, I really don't. Not for any character or personality or anything like that, but for the fact that it's the same sort of thing that bothers me about what happened with Kurt Ferentz at Iowa. You get an obscene amount of money to coach a team. Your only goal is to field the absolute best product possible. It is not your playground to get to play offensive coordinator or get to let your son play offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator or whatever. And so I think in that regard, why I don't feel sorry for Jimbo is he got all this money, and I don't think he did what he even knew was the best thing for that program, for those fans. He took the money and wasn't concerned so much with his legacy, but to me, just doing what he wanted to do with that program. So I don't feel sorry for him at all.
And I think it's important to say there, I don't think he has a lack of drive from a winning perspective, from maybe even ego or a legacy perspective. I think he has a lack of drive or hunger from an adaptability maturation perspective. I don't know if you agree with me on that. There were a lot of things that he needed to do or learn that he was not willing to look in the mirror and say, I'm not doing a very good job of handling X. I'm not scheming well. I need to improve or to modernize my approach. And there were a lot of chatter within coaching communities that I'd heard with people saying that, look, his stuff's just outdated and we know what he's doing. And it's a relief when you play Jimbo Fisher because there's a lot of stuff they don't try to do. It makes it easier for me. And I don't think there was nearly enough self-reflection on his part to say, I am not doing the sort of things I need to do to be successful. And I can tell you honestly, as somebody that has been blessed with a lot of success in my career and has dealt with a lot of things at a high level, you start to learn when you get more visibility and when you start working on really big time projects, right? You start dealing with, you live in the multimillionaire world of competition, which I'm not that far down the road, but certainly see people in that world and play in it a little bit myself. You can work really, really freaking hard, and if you work the wrong way and you work without humility, it won't get you anywhere because everybody's working hard. Everybody's driven to succeed. Everybody is trying to figure out a way to be successful, and everybody got to the point of where they are for some reason. If you're not willing to look at yourself and say, what do I need to do to differentiate myself from everybody else that's hungry and trying to get to the next point, and everybody else that's competing at this level, you aren't going to succeed. And I think that's the problem with where Jimbo Fisher got. I think he's a sharp guy. I think he's a driven guy. I think he's a hard worker. I think he wants to succeed. I think he has all those things, but frankly, I don't think his ego let him say all those things put together. This is where I need to adapt my culture. This is how I need to change my offense in order to fit things. This is how I need to change how I act within a role. And, hiring Bobby Petrino at the point of desperation isn't enough there. Nick Saban's overhauled his offense a couple times at Alabama. He brought in Lane freaking Kiffin and handed him the keys to his offense. Nick Saban handed the keys to his offense to Lane Kiffin, the guy that he'd coached against at Tennessee, that everybody thought was a clown. And he said, look, the way I want to play football isn't going to win football anymore, and I'm acknowledging this, and I need to change if I want my product to be successful. That's what makes...
He overhauled his offense 3 times since Jimbo won a national championship.
That's what the great coaches or the great people that are successful at that level do. That's why you get paid $70 million, okay, is to make those kinds of decisions. And yeah, you have to have a big ego to get to that point. But they're entrusting that when you get to that point that you're going to make decisions for your organization to be successful, and that you are going to put the organization first and yourself second, and you're going to be adaptable to do that. And I just don't think Jimbo Fisher's been willing to do it. And when it worked, it worked. And when that didn't work, and what he was trying to do didn't work, for either from a cultural perspective, from a scheme perspective, he has not shown any ability to adapt. And I, frankly, what I haven't really ever heard from him that really kind of upsets me or would disturb me if I was an athletic director is for him to come forward and say, you know, I've been really trying to drive this bus and I have not been succeeding for this program. We haven't been where they need to be. That's on me and where I am as a coach. I'm having to learn and grow. We're going to bring in such and such. I think he's a great guy, and then we're having to really embrace sort of this new era of football. I'm really excited where we're going. He's a great offensive mind, blah, 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 blah. He's not really willing to do that. Even with Jimbo Fisher, he hasn't been willing to do it. And again, Jimbo Fisher with Bobby Petrino, and that's the point, right? It almost feels like they're interchangeable, right? It's a guy that was really good 10 years ago. He's not an RPO master by any means. Comes with a lot of baggage. Probably got brought in with a tight leash. Wasn't handing the offense over. Wasn't really adapting. Wasn't really acknowledging a mistake or a flaw. And it may not even be a flaw 10 years ago, but somewhere maybe that the old way you're used to doing things doesn't work anymore. And that's why he failed. And frankly, you don't see a lot of high-level failures at guys at this level, because usually to get to the point of where Jimbo Fisher was, you show that ability to adapt. And I think this is a little unusual because he got given that contract without it. And I think, maybe Malzahn was another guy that, he always ran things the same way, and it worked when it worked and it didn't when it didn't. And he never really showed a lot of ability to adapt to that either. And I think we're entering a new era of college football now with these massive contracts being given to guys that are ascendant more than, 10 plus year proven. And maybe Texas A&M has $160 million to throw at the program, but I'm not sure everybody else does. And there's probably going to be another domino that falls in the next couple of years that's going to make people really rethink these buyouts. You got some like Brian Kelly at LSU, who's got a Heisman caliber quarterback right now and a phenomenal offense. Maybe something we'll touch on in another video this week. But that defense is terrible, and when those guys leave, are they going to continue to be good? And if they're not good, that buyout is insane. The buyout at Michigan State that they're having to deal with Mel Tucker and make all these accusations is because I don't know that they could afford to do otherwise. The buyout for Freeman at Notre Dame is insane. And those are all guys that haven't really shown any ability, like long term, that they were going to improve and adapt and find a new wave and find like a second wind. I don't know that you can point to anywhere in their careers where any of those guys have done that, or if they were even anywhere near being able to do that. And so it kind of leads you into these awkward situations. And I think Jimbo Fisher may just be the first example of what may be a number of guys that fail like this and fail in a rather spectacularly expensive fashion.
And if ADs don't figure it out, it's on them. Y'all let us know in the comments what you think about this whole situation. Who do you think is the best? Give us 3 candidates to replace Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, and let us know why, and we'll get down there and let you know why you were right or wrong. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.